Hello coders, this is Jared with Renaissance Coders, and today we are continuing with our AI in Unity 3D series. Today we have a fairly fun tutorial for you. We are going to cover the usage of cameras for player detection. So essentially we're going to be using Unity's cameras for enemy sight. Now, if you've never done anything like this before, you may be thinking, well, that sounds really complex, but it is actually fairly easy to achieve, and some of Unity's built-in methods make it really easy. So we are going to continue developing from the previous tutorials. As you can see here, I've got the previous scene and all the scripts and everything already pulled in. If you haven't watched those, you may want to go back and check them out. Okay, now let's get down to business. This project is fairly simple, as I said before, so we really don't have to do a whole lot to this. The first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new script. So right-click, create C# script, and we're just going to call this camera script. Okay? And before I actually start editing this script, I'm going to make a few changes to our scene first. I just wanted to go ahead, create the script, but now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a few changes to our scene. The first thing that I need to do to the scene is add a camera into the scene. Now we already have a camera that's tagged main camera, and that follows around the player. But this camera is not going to be a special camera. Since it's just going to be a standard camera that's dropped into the scene, it's not going to have a tag, or we don't have to name it anything special. We're just going to drop it in, and you'll see later on why we don't have to do any of those special things to this. So what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and do a game object, camera, and I actually want to go ahead and make sure that I'm mapping it to one of our AI characters. So I'm going to just select this first one up here, so he's right up here, and then I'm just going to drag the camera and put it under this guy. And I'm doing that so that the camera will naturally follow the character around in the scene. There's a few ways to do that, but this is really sort of the easiest. Just by dropping it underneath that character, the camera will naturally move with him because it is a child of that character. And now what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to zero out the X, Y, and Z. And when you do that, you can see that the camera moves to the center of this character. So right now the camera is like right at his feet, and that's how Unity does their models. The center, or the transform point is at the in between the feet essentially. So what I actually need to do here though is I need to shift this camera up because we want the camera to actually be located like at the eyes. So I'm actually just going to use the Y. I'm actually just going to move up in the Y, and as I do that, I just want to again make sure that I'm sort of locating it right at the eyes there, and I get a pretty good, let me get a different angle here. Okay, and so that's actually like right at the eyes, and I'm actually going to move it a little bit forward so that way we're, just to make sure we're not looking like through the model. So like right there you can see, well here, let me just press F and focus on it. I'm actually going to reduce the gizmo size here. There we go. Yeah, that's a pretty cool thing you could do as well, as just click on gizmos and then reduce the size if the gizmos are getting in your way for any reason. Just drop that down, and that will, allow you to see a little more of your scene. And so as you can see here, the AI, the camera actually starts a little bit in front of the AI's face, which is exactly what we want really, because it's highly unlikely that the character is going to be able to walk up, and get in between the AI and the camera. So that's pretty good positioning. Okay, the next thing I need to do is I actually need to manipulate a few of these values, because if you look down here in the camera preview, you can see that this AI can essentially see all the way to the end of the level. And if you look at the far clipping plane over here, you can see that it's set to 1,000. Well, that is way too high for an AI sight. That may work if you've got like a sniper AI or something like that, so that they can see a really long way off. But for the purposes of this tutorial, we really want it to only see limited distance. And I've actually played around with this for a while, so I've got a few values that I'm going to use, but definitely feel free to play around with these values for yourself to get something that, that works for you. Okay, so the first thing I'm actually going to change here is I'm going to drop the field of view down to 46. Okay, and if I zoom out, you can kind of, well, you can't really tell yet, but when I reduce the far clipping plane, you'll be able to tell sort of what that's doing. Okay, and I'm going to leave the near clipping plane to 0.3, and that near clipping plane is just this box right here. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that, but just follow the cursor and you may be able to see the outline of that. But it's that That's the plane. That's the near clipping plane right there. And so we can leave that right where it's at. If you want it closer, you can definitely drop it down, and you see it's getting closer when I do that. Again, I'm just going to leave it at 0.3. All right. And the next thing we actually need to do is reduce our far clipping plane. So this is how far the camera can see, and that's that plane that's way out there. So I'm just going to zoom out real quick so that way you can see. This is the far clipping plane. So this is essentially how far the camera can see. And we definitely don't want it to be that far out. Like, that's really way out there. So now what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm going to drop the far clipping plane down to 20. And when you do that, you see that this clipping plane way out here is gone, right? And that's because it's now been moved to right here. So let me just try and get a good angle so you guys can see that. Okay, and so this is the far clipping plane now. And if you look at our camera preview, you can see that it can no longer see, kind of past this first block right here. And that's really what we want. We don't want the AI to be able to see on forever, because then player detection is going to be way too easy. Okay, and that's really everything we need to do, or all the values that we need to change for the camera. So that's, that's set, that's ready to go. And now that we have that done, we're actually going to go and start editing the script in MonoDevelop. So what I did was I double-clicked on the camera script, and now I've got it open here. And as in the previous tutorials, you can see that this is really empty. And we don't really want that, so I'm actually going to go over to Enemy Site, and I'm just going to press Command A on Mac and Command C to copy, Command A, Command V. Okay, so I've just literally replaced, that base empty script with what's in Enemy Site. But when you do that, you can see the Enemy Site has now been pulled in as the class. Our states are going to be Enemy Site, so we really need to do the find and replace again. So to do that, just click this, and we're going to find Enemy Site, and we're going to replace that with camera script. Okay, and then just click all. Okay, so doing that really helps you in the future because it eliminates any errors, like Enemy Site's not available and things like that. So again, that was covered in the other tutorials, so it's a pretty easy process. I can just close out of this now. And the first thing we actually want to do to this script is, since we copied over Enemy Site, we really want to remove a few things. So I'm just going to zoom in real quick to make everything, a little bit easier for you guys to read. And I'm actually going to remove the investigate state, because essentially when using this camera, we're always going to be investigating. The enemy AI is always going to have that camera on. The camera's always going to be looking for the player. So we don't really need that investigate state anymore. All right, and since I've actually removed that investigate state, I can actually remove all the variables for investigating, and I can remove the variables for sight. Well, you can keep the sight distance if you want. That since we are still going to be using a raycast, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and remove it, and again, you can add that back later if you want. Since I've removed that, you'll notice that you're going to get an error here because it's not being created, so we just need to remove the initialization of that high multiplier. And now if I just keep going through, since I removed that stuff in the top, the errors are going to start popping up down here. So I can just remove the case state.investigate. Okay, just keep going through here. And now we can actually remove this entire investigate method. And again, we're just cleaning up this script because we no longer need this, right? So we're essentially just doing this because this script is not going to use any of these things, and I've always found it to be better to remove the things from the script that you're no longer using, because if you don't remove them, then later on if someone comes back and looks at it, they'll be like, what is this stuff? And it just doesn't make sense. So cleaning up your scripts is a really good thing to do. I'm also going to remove this on trigger enter. So again, if you watched the previous tutorials, you'll know that we're using a trigger to collider so that when the player enters this trigger collider, the AI essentially turns, looks to the player's location, and if a raycast hits the player, then the AI does something. So we're no longer going to be doing that. We're essentially just going to use the camera for all of our detection. So what I'm actually going to do is go ahead and remove this on trigger enter, and we're going to remove that trigger collider as well once we get back into the scene. But for now, that's fine. Okay, and the last thing I can really remove here is this fixed update, because this is what we were using in our previous tutorial for Enemy Site. We were using raycasts, one forward, one like 40 degrees to the right and 140 degrees to the left. you know, from transform.forward, and those were always on and always looking for the player, you know, so if it hit the player, then the AI started chasing the player. So we can actually remove all of this as well. So make sure you select the right curly brace, just hit delete. And so now, you know, we've got a pretty empty script now, you know, it's not really doing much right now. It's essentially just doing waypoints. Okay, now that we've removed all that stuff that we don't need from the previous script, let's go ahead and add in the things that we are going to need for this new script. And, you know, the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back up to the top and add a few variables for camera site. So I'm just going to do / variables for camera site. Okay, and for the camera site, we're actually going to need a public game object player, and all of the other scripts have worked by, you know, none of the other scripts have actually referenced the player, and it depends on how you're building your AI, you know, so you can build your AI so that it knows nothing about the player, or you can build the AI so that it always knows where the player is at. And, you know, that's just really sort of personal preference. I've seen it done both ways. You know, sometimes it can be hard to do an AI that knows nothing about the player. And then other times it's just easier to reference the player. You know, like for this instance, since we're going to be using methods that actually look at the player's bounds or the player's collider's bounds, then we actually need some information about the player. So that's why I'm doing that there. And the next thing I'm actually going to do is say public collider. That's going to be the player col. And then I'm going to do a public camera, right? So that's the camera we created earlier. I'm just going to call that my cam. And then I'm going to do private plane and make that an array and do planes. Okay, and that's really going to do it for the variables that we need. And I'm actually not going to do any initialization here. And that's just because for the public variables, I'm actually going to set those using the inspector. And for the private plane array, the reason why I'm not initializing the plane array inside of the start method is because that has to update every frame. You know, if you don't update it every frame, then what will happen is the planes will be looking at a previous position, and the character could run through or run right in front of the AI, and it may not detect it because it may be looking at a previous position. That's why we have to update every single frame. Okay, so that's really going to do it for the initialization. We don't have to add a new state in our finite state machine. So what we're actually going to do is we're just going to scroll down really quickly, and we're going to go beneath our void chase method. And under here, I'm actually going to do a void update. Okay, open up my curly braces. And inside this method, the first thing I'm actually going to do is set this planes variable equal to geometry utility dot calculate frustum planes, and we're actually going to reference my cam here. Okay, so essentially what this is going to do is it's going to look at the camera that we're referencing, and it's going to calculate the frustum planes on that camera. And again, I said, you know, we need to update that every frame, and that's why we're doing this here, because we're calculating those frustum planes every single frame. Now, the frustum planes are sort of what I showed you before, you know, to where it's the near clipping plane, the far clipping plane, and then there are multiple planes in between. You know, so there's a connecting plane to the right, the bottom, the left, and the top. That's what the frustum planes are, you know, and then everything that comes in between that is going to be what we're testing against. And to actually do that, what we're going to do is we're going to say if geometry utility dot test planes AABB, and then for this we're going to actually pass in planes and player col dot bounds. Okay, so essentially we're looking at the bounds of the collider for the player, and you know, we're doing that because, you know, you don't want to try to detect a mesh, or, you know, do the dot is visible method. I've seen people do that before, but that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me when you can just very simply use these methods. So the next thing we're actually going to do, just to make sure this is working, we're going to do a debug.log, and we're just going to say player sighted here. And I'm doing that just, you know, like if you're testing this for yourself to see You know, if that's working, then you can always use a debug.log and make sure you're watching your console to make sure that when the player should be sighted, he is sighted. You know, so that's just a really easy thing you can do there. And the next thing I'm actually going to do is just do an empty else. So that inside of this else statement, we're not actually going to have anything. So it's just an empty else. So essentially, if you're sighted, do this, else just keep rolling through what you're doing, you know? And now, actually, one of the last things I need to do is do another method, and I'm just going to call this void check for player. Okay, and this method is actually going to be doing our raycasting. Because if you don't use a raycast here, the camera will actually see through objects and be able to see the player. And that's not what we want, right? We only want the AI to react when it can actually see the player. So let's do a for instance here. Let's say the player is actually behind a wall and the AI turns and looks through looks at the wall, right where the player's at. Then, without using a raycast here, the AI will react and run at the player. And that's not what we want. We want it so that if, the same scenario occurs to where the player's behind a wall, the AI turns, scans the wall. When it scans, the camera picks up that, hey, this collider is inside of my frustum planes. Then our update method will say, hey, the player's inside of these frustum planes. So what should I do? Should I react? No. What I should do is I should do a raycast, and if the raycast actually hits the player, then I need to react. So that's just a really simple way of, making sure that we are getting some believable behavior here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's program out this method. Again, I'm just going to do a raycast hit, call that hit. And I'm actually going to do a debug.drawRay. And I'm doing that just so that we can visually see the ray. And I'm actually going to cast it from mycam.transform.position. So it's going to shoot directly out of the camera, so straight forward. And to do that, we're going to do transform.forward times 10. And then we're just going to set the color to green, make it really visible there. And that's all we need to draw the ray. So right now what will happen is, we can visually see the ray. So in order to actually cast the ray, we're just going to do an if statement and say if physics.raycast, and we're going to say mycam.transform.position. So again, we're just doing sort of the same settings here. And then we're going to do transform.forward, and we're going to set the out to hit, which is the raycast hit we created earlier. And then we're going to set the length to 10. Okay, and now what we actually want to do is we want to change the state of the AI. So we've covered that in multiple tutorials before. To change the state, we're just going to do state is equal to camera site, or camera script, dot state dot chase. And make sure you set the target. So our target is going to be equal to hit.collider.gameObject. Okay, so that's it for the check for player. Now we actually need to call that. And again, we can just call this inside of our update function. And we can do check for player here. So that's all we have to do to this script. Really easy stuff. We've covered most of this in previous tutorials, but I definitely wanted to show you guys this way of doing it. Now what we're actually going to do is make sure that we save that out. And then we're just going to go back to Unity here. And now in Unity, you can see that our updates actually went through. Now we actually want to check the console, make sure we don't have any errors. Okay, we don't. And now we're going to click on our AI over here. And we're actually going to turn off this enemy sight script that we have on there currently. And then just drag the camera script over there. Okay, so now this is in place. Now remember I said earlier that we're actually going to be setting some of these variables inside of the inspector. And, you can set the target if you want, but that's actually being set, by the raycast. So we're not going to worry about setting the target, but we are going to have to set the player and the player call. So I'm actually going to just drag the third person controller, set that as player. Okay, so I actually forgot to do something because it's going to be really hard to set the player call in the inspector, because when you click on this, you can see it goes here. And one thing you can do is try to lock it and then go over here, but as you can see, it's not changing, so we still can't get to that player call. So, with when something like that's happening, you definitely need to set this through script, which is something I didn't show you. So let's go back to MonoDevelop really quickly. We're going to scroll up to the start method. And actually, we're just going to set this underneath this waypoint index. And to do that, we're just going to say player col is equal to player dot get component, and it's just going to be a collider. Okay. So that's actually going to be set now through script. So we don't have to worry about setting that in the inspector. Sorry about that. All right, so let's go back to Unity. So we don't have to worry about setting the player col either. But now the last thing we need to set is this my cam. And again, that's that camera on or under the parent object for this character. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drag the camera down and set that up. Okay, now everything should be set. You know, just for testing purposes, what I'm going to go ahead and do is disable these other guys just to make it easier to test. So to do that, you can just select all of them, click on this, and now the only AI we've got in the actual scene is this guy up here. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and press play, make sure everything starts. Okay, so I can see immediately I've got a warning here, or just a little information, because we didn't remove the audio listener from the camera that we added, and we can go back and do that fairly easily. But to test this, you know, it's a lot easier to test in the scene view. And that's very simply because, you know, in this scene view, I can actually select the player in my hierarchy and drag him around really easily. You know, so I can actually drag him here, and then as you can see, I'm actually inside the camera, but there's no way he could see me right now. You know, so he's actually just going to walk on by. Now what I'm actually going to do is set up over here to where he should be able to see me as soon as he turns and sweeps. Well, it looks like he looked right past me. There we go. So if I were actually moving around, I would have gotten inside of that raycast a little faster. And, you know, so this is working. You know, the raycast hit me, he ran at me. So what I'm actually going to do now is just stop that play instance. So what I'm actually going to do now is go ahead and press this play button again. And as you can see, I did want to point this out really quickly, and that's that, you know, we're still getting about 100 frames per second here. Sometimes it's dipping a little below that, but for the most part, we're still getting a pretty high quality frames per second there. I think minimum you want about 60, so you know we're still running pretty well here. So now I'm actually going to try and get inside of that camera, and then when I get inside the camera, make sure that he can see me. You know, so as you can see, this is kind of cool. Like if you're doing a stealth game, you can very easily sneak up behind him and stuff like that. You know, another thing you can actually do is a raycast from the back. Oh, he actually sighted me again. So he actually turned, and I didn't expect him to turn, and he ran at me. So looks like he got a little stuck there. All right, so that's going to do it for this tutorial. We are going to continue with this tutorial. As you saw there are a few little bugs in here, but I just want to show you guys that you can use cameras to enable enemy sight fairly easily. So the next tutorial, we're actually going to expand on this a little bit and maybe do a raycast straight back, and you know, do a few other things based on sight and a few more states for this AI. Okay guys, that's going to do it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It's a fun little tutorial, you know, that's pretty easy for anyone to do. If you did like the tutorial, be sure to drop us a like. If you like the channel, be sure to subscribe. We love our subscribers. And as always, thanks for watching, and this has been a Renaissance Coders tutorial.